Do you really believe you own him?" The words sliced through the drawing room, sharp as the sunlight cutting across the plantation's tall, multi-pane windows. Clara Marwood, the mistress of Bellwood Plantation, paused mid-stride. She had purchased him herself, an enslaved man, strong, composed, the kind who seemed born both to endure and command respect without uttering a single word. His name was Elias, in his early 30s, skin dark as polished mahogany, short natural hair, a physique honed by labor and discipline. To Clara, he was meant to fulfill her needs, her desires, the secret corners of her lonely life. She had envisioned him obedient, respectful, wholly hers. But life, as it often did, had other intentions. At the far end of the room stood Annabelle, her daughter, barely 20, youthful, mischievous, with a daring glint in her eye that mirrored her mother's, yet carried the spark of rebellion. Her softly colored Victorian dress hugged her figure gracefully as she stepped toward Elias. "I think he belongs where he chooses," Annabelle murmured, her hand rising slowly, almost teasingly, toward Elias's jaw. Clara's eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, holding the hem of his shirt, pulling gently. "Annabelle, he is mine. I brought him to Bellwood to serve me. Do not cross the line." Elias shifted slightly between them, calm yet alert, his dark eyes scanning both women. The tension was tangible, a silent duel of desire and control, unspoken but clear. Neither mother nor daughter wanted to seem overt, yet every movement, every glance, every subtle lean was a claim of possession. The plantation walls, polished wooden panels glowing in the soft golden afternoon, light filtering through tall windows, witnessed this quiet but fierce struggle. Clara's wealth, authority, and years of cultivated poise clashed with Annabelle's youth, curiosity, and defiance. Yet Elias remained steady, the calm eye in the storm of their competing desires. "Clara," Annabelle's voice was soft, almost teasing, yet the heat beneath it undeniable. She brushed her fingers lightly against Elias's jaw, a subtle challenge, a claim. Her gaze never left his daring, testing, teasing eyes. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hand gripped his shirt, the fine silk of her glove brushing the sturdy fabric of his vest. She had never known jealousy like this, not for a man she owned, not from her own daughter. And yet here it was, raw, unrelenting, almost violent in intensity. Elias remained silent. He neither stepped forward nor retreated. His calm gaze weighed them both, silently acknowledging the struggle without yielding. He understood the power he held, not that granted by wealth or title, but the kind that came from being desired, from being the fulcrum of rivalry. The tension almost choked the air. A servant carrying a tray of tea entered, frozen mid-step. Sensing the charged mood, he quietly withdrew, knowing nothing must interrupt the silent battle. Clara straightened, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. "I bought him for my desires," she said firmly, her voice echoing slightly in the tall room. "Not for yours," Annabelle smiled almost imperceptibly, her youthful charm a weapon in itself. "And yet, mother, he is here, and I am here. Perhaps the one who truly claims him will be the one who understands him best." Elias tilted his head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement, betraying no allegiance to either. The two women's faces told the story. Clara's showed the sharp, measured intensity of authority. Annabelle's glowed with playful defiance, desire, and curiosity. Between them, Elias's composed face mirrored both. The room seemed to shrink around them. Every polished panel, every faint shadow, every ray of sunlight through the fire. Curtains magnified the silent struggle. Their breathing synced with the tension, a rhythm none wanted to break, yet all were bound to. Finally, Clara eased her grip slightly, yet her eyes stayed on Elias. "Mark my words," she said low, but firm. "He will stay loyal to me." Annabelle's fingers lingered a moment longer on his cheek before she withdrew, her defiance intact. "Loyalty is not given, mother. It must be earned." Elias's gaze remained steady, unwavering. Between them he carried the weight of choice, unspoken. In that room, The plantation, even the walls, seemed to hum with desire, rivalry, and forbidden longing. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying magnolia and earth. Inside, tension was a storm contained within polished walls, a silent conflict shaping every glance, every gesture, every touch to come. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, one truth was clear: this was no ordinary slave, and no ordinary family. This was a triangle of desire, jealousy, and forbidden longing, and the storm was just beginning. Before we continue, ask yourself, are you drawn to tales that blur history and legend? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button so you never miss a story. Leave a comment telling us which town or city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. The evening sun cast warmth across Bellwood Plantation. Inside the grand drawing room, the air was thick with unspoken conflict. Clara had retreated to a private sitting area, a delicate fan fluttering nervously between her fingers. Annabelle lingered near the tall windows, brushing the lace of her dress over her wrist, eyes constantly flicking toward Elias, who stood near the hearth, calm and composed. The silence broke only with the occasional creak of polished floors or rustle of curtains. Yet beneath the quiet hummed a dangerous electricity that made every gesture, every glance feel magnified. Elias shifted slightly, muscles flexing subtly as he adjusted his stance, but his expression stayed serene. Betraying nothing, he moved silently between mother and daughter. Clara's mind raced. She had purchased Elias thinking she could contain desire, control need. But seeing him with Annabelle, watching her daughter's confident gestures draw his attention, sparked a jealousy she hadn't expected. Elias, Clara called softly, yet firmly, her voice slicing the tension. Would you come closer? I wish to speak with you. Elias complied smoothly, each step measured. He stood just before her, the faintest smile at the corners of his lips, as though he understood the undercurrent better than either woman. Clara's heart raced, her control slipping. She raised her hand, brushing a lock of hair from her face, asserting authority with poise rather than force. Annabelle watched, allowing a subtle, almost invisible smirk. She moved slightly closer to Elias, making the air around him feel heavier, warmer, a gentle pull, even if he did not turn his head. Her hand brushed lightly against his arm, deliberate, a silent claim daring Clara to notice. Clara's eyes narrowed. The touch sparked jealousy, but she restrained herself, knowing any overt display could worsen the situation. Instead, she leaned slightly toward Elias, her hand resting on his vest. Touch firm but measured. Their eyes met, and for a moment the room seemed to tighten around unspoken desire. Do you understand your duties here, Elias? Clara asked, voice steady, underlying tension betraying the storm beneath. I do, mistress, Elias replied, calm, respectful, yet his eyes flicked ever so slightly toward Annabelle. A spark of curiosity, or acknowledgement, passed before he returned his gaze to Clara. Annabelle's lips curved in a quiet, mischievous smile. She stepped closer than etiquette allowed, her hair and brushing lightly along his forearm. Mistress, must everything always be about rules and duty? Perhaps there is room for choice, she said, teasing, almost dangerously. Clara's hand tightened on his vest, but she held firm, exuding the subtle authority she had always commanded. Choice is a luxury for those who earn it, she replied, voice firm, both warning and desire. Elias stayed still, calm between the brewing storm. He understood the unfolding dynamics, mother's authority, daughter's defiance, both reaching for something beyond propriety, trained to obey, to serve, yet human desire could not be contained. The quiet tension drew them physically closer, each gesture a small battlefield. Annabelle leaned just enough, fingers tracing a line from his shoulder to chest. Clara's hand remained firm on his vest, thumb brushing his collar, asserting control without words. Elias felt the pull from both directions, a silent tug of war, testing the restraint honed over years. Outside, The wind rustled magnolia trees, fragrant blooms drifting through slightly open windows. The scent carried into the room, mingling with the heavy, unspoken desire. The room carried a quiet tension, almost unnoticed by the women, yet somehow amplifying the charged atmosphere. Annabelle's eyes met her mother's briefly, a silent challenge, and Clara returned it with a look sharpened by authority and experience. Neither spoke, yet each communicated volumes in those fleeting moments. Clara finally exhaled slowly, straightening her posture, striving to regain composure. "Elias," she said, her voice softer this time, "you will attend carefully to my needs. That is not up for debate." Annabelle's fingers lingered a moment longer on his arm before pulling away, a subtle gesture of defiance. "Of course, Mother," she said lightly, though her eyes betrayed the opposite. Elias inclined his head slightly, though her eyes betrayed the opposite, a quiet acknowledgement that didn't fully commit him to either side. His calm presence was magnetic, drawing both women toward him in ways words could never capture. He stood between them, like a living balance point, silent yet potent, the center of a storm neither woman could entirely control. As evening faded into twilight, Clara retreated to her private chambers to compose herself, her heart still racing from the delicate battles of control and desire. Annabelle lingered by the window, watching him, the dying sun casting a warm glow across the soft folds of her dress. Elias, standing alone in the center of the room, felt the weight of both women's desire and rivalry pressing upon him, subtle yet insistent. The plantation, with its grandeur and wealth, silently observed. Every polished panel, every flicker of candlelight, every shadow seemed to mirror the quiet but explosive tension. Though no words were spoken of love, loyalty, or longing, each glance, each brush of a hand, spoke louder than any declaration could. That evening at Bellwood Plantation, outward appearances remained unchanged, yet everything had shifted beneath the surface. A silent game had begun, a dangerous, intoxicating dance of rivalry, desire, and forbidden longing. In the quiet heart of the estate, Elias remained the calm center of a storm that would only grow stronger with each passing day. The next morning, Bellwood Plantation awoke to the chirping of birds and the distant clatter of horseshoes on cobblestones. Inside the grand house, however, the air was heavy, steeped in the unspoken tensions of the previous day. Clara moved through the polished halls with measured steps, her long Victorian dress whispering against the wooden floors. Every glance toward Elias reminded her of her daughter's subtle defiance from the night before. Elias, as always, remained calm and composed, carrying out his duties with quiet precision. He brought trays of tea and breakfast to the sitting room, moving with the confidence of a man who understood both his role and the power his presence held. His eyes occasionally flicked toward Annabelle, who sat near the window, sunlight catching her hair, her youthful face radiant with curiosity. Clara entered carrying a folded letter from a distant relative, though her attention remained on the scene before her. She placed the letter on the table, careful not to reveal the tremor in her hand. The tension in the room was palpable. Annabelle's gaze lingered on Elias, playful yet soft with curiosity. "Elias," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "Bring me the ledger from the study. I need to review the accounts for Bellwood today." "Of course, mistress," he replied, moving gracefully toward the study. Even in obedience, his presence commanded attention, impossible for either woman to ignore. Annabelle's hand brushed briefly against the edge of the table, the faintest flick toward the chair where Elias would return. Clara noticed immediately, a small, nearly imperceptible gesture, but one loaded with unspoken meaning. She clenched her fingers around the letter, forcing herself to remain composed, to appear unshaken. When Elias returned with the ledger, Annabelle leaned forward slightly, brushing his arm in the gentlest, most deliberate of touches. "Thank you, Elias," she said softly, her eyes locking with his in a gaze full of mischief and curiosity. Clara's chest tightened. She moved closer, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Ensure the entries are correct. Bellwood depends on precision," she said, her tone smooth and controlled, though underneath simmered a quiet possessiveness. Elias's dark eyes shifted between them, calm and measured. He felt the subtle pull from both directions, the daughter's playful challenge and the mother's quiet insistence. His mind remained steady, yet even he sensed the shifting dynamic, the intensifying game of attention and desire. After breakfast, Clara withdrew to her private chamber, needing a moment alone to gather her thoughts. She paced, the rustle of her dress filling the quiet room, her heart racing in ways she had not expected. Annabel, meanwhile, wandered into the garden beneath the sprawling magnolia trees, her eyes following Elias as he moved about the courtyard, tending to chores and assisting the workers with quiet authority. The garden smelled of magnolia blooms and freshly turned soil. Yet every glance at him thrilled her with danger. Her hand brushed the railing, imagining it touching his arm. She smiled softly, knowing her mother would never approve, yet unable to resist the magnetic pull between them. Clara, at her desk in the chamber, could not ignore the subtle gestures. Her daughter seemed to find every opportunity to attract Elias's attention. The jealousy that simmered under her composed exterior was intoxicating, infuriating, and oddly thrilling. She could not confront Annabel openly. Doing so would expose her own desires, her own vulnerabilities. Yet every glance, every slight touch, made her heart race. Elias, moving through the plantation with quiet dignity, performed each action precisely and professionally, aware of the silent attention of both women. He knew he had become the pivot of desire, the fulcrum around which mother and daughter revolved. Though he obeyed, carrying out his duties carefully, he understood the quiet glances, the fleeting touches, all carried a power he could not ignore. As afternoon fell, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the plantation. Clara summoned Elias to her study again, instructing him to review accounts and prepare notes for her inspection. His movements were calm, deliberate, professorial, yet the awareness of both women watching charged the air with tension. Annabel lingered in the doorway, pretending to admire the garden, but each movement was calculated to attract his attention without directly challenging her mother. Her youthful face flushed with excitement and curiosity, her hands delicate and intentional. Clara's sharp eyes caught every gesture, every flick, every glance. But she restrained herself, unwilling to show impulsive jealousy. Hours passed in this unspoken dance. Each touch, each glance, a subtle statement. Elias remained at the center, composed, aware of the magnetic forces from both sides, yet maintaining measured calm. By evening, the plantation had grown quiet. Workers had retreated to their quarters. The gardens lay still under twilight, and inside the grand house, the drawing room seemed charged with unspent energy. Clara and Annabel both understood, without speaking, that the subtle games, quiet challenges, and magnetic tension surrounding Elias were far from over. As night fell over Bellwood, the plantation seemed alive with whispers of desire, tension, and forbidden longing. In the quiet heart of the house, Elias remained the calm center, the unseen yet undeniable force, drawing both women closer, testing the limits of loyalty, desire, and temptation. That night, neither Clara nor Annabel slept easily. Thoughts of Elias, the subtle touches, the silent challenges, and the dangerous allure of forbidden desire kept their minds restless. As the moon cast silver light across the plantation, the struggle for his attention continued, hidden, subtle, and utterly consuming. Candlelight flickered against the polished wooden panels of Bellwood Plantation, casting twisting shadows that reflected the unspoken tensions. The house was quiet. Servants had long retired, leaving the drawing room bathed in soft evening light. Yet the sad atmosphere was far from peaceful. Clara Marwood sat in her high-backed chair, posture rigid, silk handkerchief clutched in her hands. The previous day replayed in her mind, like a dangerous dream. Annabel's playful touches, subtle defiance, and the way Elias remained calm in the center of it all. Clara's jealousy simmered, sharp and biting, impossible to fully control. She had considered herself mistress of both house and desire, yet her daughter now challenged that quietly, insinuating herself into the private world Clara had sought to protect. Elias, moving through the halls with quiet authority, remained the focus of both women's attention, each step measured and precise. The unspoken competition seemed alive around him, pulsing like a living thing. Annabel lingered near the back hallway, pretending to inspect the ledgers left in the study, yet her eyes followed him with calculated care. Her youthful face betrayed a quiet excitement beneath the guise of diligence, and her eyes followed Elias as he arranged the fireplace tools and adjusted the candlelight. Her hand brushed lightly against the ledger she carried, a delicate movement echoing the teasing touches she had given him before. She smiled faintly, knowing her mother would disapprove, yet unable to resist the thrill of this forbidden attention. Clara rose from her chair and walked toward the hallway with measured grace. "Annabel," she said smoothly, voice carrying authority, "remember your duties. The household must stay in order, and you will not let yourself, or him, be distracted by trivialities." Annabel tilted her head, her lips curling in the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. "Of course, Mother," she replied, though her gaze lingered on Elias just long enough to probe boundaries, enough to spark Clara's jealousy without open defiance. Elias paused mid-step, aware of the subtle currents swirling arrow and him. He did not flinch or shift allegiance. He stayed composed, the calm center of desire and rivalry, between two women whose intentions were as intricate as the polished patterns of the plantation floors beneath them. Yet he felt the tension acutely, the invisible tug-of-war, drawing them closer while testing the limits of propriety and restraint. As evening fell, Clara summoned Elias to her private study under the pretense of reviewing correspondence from distant relatives. The soft click of the door closing behind them cut through the stillness of the house, leaving only the two of them. Candlelight flickered across his features, highlighting the quiet strength in his dark eyes, the tension in his poised frame. Clara studied him carefully, hands resting lightly on the ledger she had brought. "Elias," she said softly, her voice firm yet tinged with vulnerability, "you must understand the position you hold here. You are responsible not just for the tasks I assign, but also for maintaining order in this household. Do you understand?" "I understand, mistress," Elias replied calmly, his voice steady, revealing none of the inner awareness he held of the subtle attentions both mother and daughter directed at him. His eyes flicked briefly to the open window where the garden stretched into shadow, moonlight tracing silver highlights across the magnolia blooms. Clara's hand brushed the ledger's edge, a faint tremor betraying the conflict in her heart. "You are always calm," she murmured, almost to herself. "But are you ever tempted? Ever drawn to the attention you receive from those around you?" Elias met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes holding quiet understanding. "Temptation is a luxury I cannot afford, mistress," he said, yet a subtle warmth lingered in his look, a flicker of humanity reminding Clara, and later Annabel, that he was more than the obedient figure she imagined. Meanwhile, in the garden beyond, Annabel lingered beneath the magnolia trees. The faint rustle of leaves echoed her quiet plotting. She had noticed the subtle interactions in the study, the lingering glances, the deliberate pauses, and felt a thrill she could not suppress. Every touch, every look, every small gesture was part of a dangerous, intoxicating game. Her hand traced the smooth trunk of a tree, fingers curling slightly as she thought of Elias, poised and calm, caught in the invisible web, woven by two women whose desires were both forbidden and undeniable. She smiled faintly, a spark of defiance in her eyes, knowing her mother would never approve, yet unable to resist the pull of curiosity and attraction. Hours passed under the soft glow of candlelight and moonlight, each room in the plantation holding its own quiet secrets. Clara and Annabel moved with careful awareness, every glance and gesture laden with tension. Elias remained the silent center, aware of both attentions but fully composed, a calm eye in the storm of desire and rivalry. As night deepened, Clara retired to her private chambers, the weight of jealousy and longing heavy on her shoulders. Annabel stayed in the garden, where shadows played across the magnolia blossoms, her thoughts alive with curiosity, desire, and the thrill of forbidden attention. Elias, at the quiet heart of the household, bore the weight of their unspoken longings with dignity and restraint, aware that the delicate balance was as fragile as the candlelight flickering across the polished wood of Bellwood. Bellwood was no longer simply a house of order and duty. It had become a stage for a dangerous, intoxicating dance of forbidden longing, and none could tell where it would lead. The early morning mist clung to the plantation grounds, curling around magnolia trees and drifting over the manicured lawns in soft, silvery tendrils. Inside, the quiet of dawn felt heavier than usual, charged with an invisible tension that made even the faintest sound seem significant. Clara moved through the corridors with careful grace, the rustle of her dress against polished wood marking her presence. Her eyes flicked to the sitting room where Elias performed his morning duties, arranging books and letters with precise hands. Every motion was deliberate, yet it carried an underlying strength and composure that drew attention and unnerved her simultaneously. Annabel appeared in the doorway of the drawing room, her presence light and playful. She leaned casually against the frame, her youthful features flushed, eyes sparkling with curiosity and mischief. Her gaze lingered on Elias, who remained oblivious to the subtle signals she sent with body language and glances. Elias. Clara's voice called softly but firmly, "Fetch the morning accounts from the study." He nodded, moving with calm authority. Annabel stepped forward, her hand brushing lightly against the edge of the table he had stood by. The touch was subtle and teasing, yet carried the weight of her curiosity and desire. Clara pressed her lips into a thin line. Jealousy pricked her chest, but her posture remained firm, speaking volumes without a word. When Elias returned with the documents, the morning unfolded in a delicate, tension-filled dance. Clara seated herself, eyes sharp, observing every movement of both Elias and her daughter. Annabel moved closer, under the pretense of inspecting the ledger, her hand grazing his arm with careful gentleness. Each gesture, the tilt of her head, the flicker in her eyes, was calculated to entice, provoke, and test the invisible boundaries Clara sought to enforce. Clara's own hand moved lightly toward Elias's sleeve, gripping the fabric ever so subtly, asserting her presence without betrayal. Young, her inner turmoil. Their eyes met briefly, a flash of mutual understanding passing between them. Elias remained composed, aware of both attentions and claims, maintaining the delicate equilibrium of the household. By mid-morning, Clara retreated to her private chambers, ostensibly to review correspondence, but truly to compose herself. Her thoughts were clouded by her daughter's subtle provocations and Elias's magnetic calm. Seizing the opportunity, Annabel led Elias toward the garden, claiming she was checking the grounds. Sunlight filtered through magnolia leaves, casting a soft glow over them. Her hand brushed against his arm while examining the hedges, a fleeting touch sending ripples through the charged air. Elias stayed composed, yet the warmth of her fingers against his skin did not escape him. The plantation was quiet around them, the wind whispering through the trees, magnolia petals drifting like snow across the grass. Annabel's youthful energy radiated, challenging both her mother's authority and the calm composure Elias maintained. From a distance, Clara watched through the study window, her chest tightening, as she observed her daughter's playful defiance and his steady endurance. She exhaled slowly, attempting composure, but the pang of jealousy burned sharply beneath the surface. Subtle interactions continued to escalate. Annabel lingered near him during tasks, her hand brushing his shoulder, her gaze holding longer than propriety allowed. Clara's efforts to assert authority were measured, her touches firm yet controlled, reminders of her position without revealing the vulnerability she felt. By afternoon, the tension in the house became nearly unbearable, each polished panel, shadow, and sunbeam amplifying the silent struggle. A quiet moment came when Clara summoned Elias to her study again. As he leaned over the desk to arrange correspondence, Annabel's hand brushed lightly against the small of his back under the guise of adjusting a chair. The fleeting touch caused a subtle shift in the room's energy. Clara's fingers tightened on the desk's edge, but she forced herself to remain composed, hiding the storm of emotion within. Betraying the storm within, the tension grew almost tangible, an invisible thread stretching tight between the three, pulling and twisting with every glance, every subtle gesture. Elias, standing in the middle, was the calm eye of this storm, aware of the pull yet steady, maintaining the delicate balance between duty and the magnetic tension drawing him from both sides. As evening fell, shadows deepened across the plantation, and Clara retreated once again to her private chambers, her mind racing. Annabelle lingered in the garden, bathed in the fading glow, the soft rustle of magnolia, leaves keeping pace with the rapid beat of her heart. Elias moved silently between the house and the grounds, aware of the invisible currents surrounding him, carrying the weight of desire and rivalry with quiet poise. The day ended with the subtle understanding that the unspoken struggles had grown even sharper. No words were spoken, yet every glance, every action, every fleeting touch had thickened the tension. Bellwood Plantation was no longer simply a house of order and duty. It had become a stage for forbidden longing, a battlefield of subtle challenges, and a theater in which Elias remained the center, the pivot around which mother and daughter revolved. And as night settled, the invisible threads of desire, rivalry, and curiosity stretched taut, promising that tomorrow would bring new silent provocations, gentle touches, and moments capable of igniting the fragile balance of authority, obedience, and forbidden longing into a storm none of them could yet foresee. The plantation sat under a muted gray sky, early morning clouds, heavy with the threat of rain. Inside, the house felt unusually quiet. Even the servants moved cautiously, aware of the tension that had become almost tangible between the mistress, her daughter, and the man at the center of their world. Clara Marwood paced the polished wooden floors of her private chambers, hands tightly folded. The past days weighed heavily on her. Every glance from Annabelle, every small touch, every silent tug of Elias's attention had chipped away at her usual composure. Her chest tightened with each thought of her daughter leaning toward him, fingers brushing his arm, youthful eyes locking with his in ways Clara had never dared. She poured a cup of tea, the delicate china trembling slightly in her hands. She had always prided herself on control of the household, control of appearances, control of desire. Yet now, watching her daughter and Elias, she realized control was slipping, subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Elias entered her chamber, holding the ledger from the previous day. His presence was calm, measured, yet there was a quiet magnetism in his movement, in the way his eyes met hers briefly before drifting elsewhere. Clara felt the familiar ache in her chest, the pull of desire she had tried to suppress. "Mistress," he said, his voice steady, carrying the understated authority she had come to respect and fear. "The entries you requested have been updated." Clara's fingers brushed the ledger as she took it from him. "Thank you, Elias," she murmured, voice barely hiding the tremor beneath. She studied him, searching for a hint of preference, a sign of loyalty, but he revealed nothing, calm and composed, the eye in the storm that neither she nor Annabelle could disturb. Outside, Annabelle lingered near the hallway window, ostensibly looking at the garden, but watching them instead. Her youthful curiosity and desire had become a playful game, each glance and subtle gesture designed to tease, provoke, and challenge. She leaned slightly against the window frame, her hand brushing the lace of her sleeve, a deliberate echo of the touches she had made in the drawing room and garden. As Elias moved to leave, Clara's hand brushed against his arm, light and intentional, a quiet reminder of her claim. Elias paused, dark eyes meeting hers briefly, acknowledging the touch without giving any sign of preference. The silent tension, the authority, the desire hung in the air like a fragile thread, ready to snap. The morning passed with heightened awareness. Every step, every gesture, every glance was weighted with meaning. Annabelle found ways to cross paths with Elias during his tasks, her touches fleeting yet purposeful. Clara's authority, her subtle possessiveness, appeared in quiet gestures, the brush of the hand, a tilt of the shoulder, the firmness of her posture. Both women's emotions teetered on the edge of control, vulnerability peeking through in the faintest tremor, hesitation, or pause. By midday, Clara had retired to the drawing room, ostensibly to read, but she could not shake the feeling of being observed, tested, challenged. Elias moved quietly about the house, attending small tasks, yet aware of the invisible pull from both women, sensing every glance, every subtle gesture, measuring the delicate balance he maintained between duty and magnetic attention, pressing from both sides. Annabelle wandered hallways, drawn to the study under the guise of curiosity about the ledgers, yet truly seeking proximity to Elias. Their brief interactions, her hand brushing his shoulder, eyes lingering just long enough, were charged with silent electricity. She thrilled each time she tested her mother's authority, each time she risked provocation. Clara's composure began to crack. Sitting in the drawing room, vulnerability she had long suppressed rose to the surface. She realized with a sharp pang that her desire for Elias could not be contained by authority or social expectation. It was raw, urgent, impossible to ignore. Seeing her daughter bold and playful only intensified it. As evening descended, the first rain began, tapping softly against the windows. The gentle patter seemed to echo the rhythm of unspoken emotions, each drop a whisper in the growing storm of desire, rivalry, and forbidden longing. Clara retreated to her chambers once more, hands trembling slightly as she closed the door behind her. The ledger lay forgotten. Her mind was consumed by her daughter's subtle provocations, Elias's calm, poised presence, and the dangerous thrill of desire she could neither accept nor ignore. Annabelle, standing under the veranda arches, watched rain fall over the magnolia trees, petals gleaming with moisture. Her thoughts were no longer innocent. Each glance toward Elias, each gentle touch carried curiosity, temptation, and near-reckless desire. She knew the danger of defying her mother, yet the thrill of the forbidden was intoxicating. Elias, aware of the thickening tension, moved quietly through the house, tending tasks, balancing attention and restraint. He felt the pull of both women, the subtle brush of Annabelle's fingers, the commanding presence of Clara, and navigated it with calm awareness, masking the quiet stirrings of human feeling he undeniably experienced. Fall Bellwood Plantation was drenched in shadow, the rain casting silver streaks across floors and windows. Inside, composure cracked. Clara paced, face showing faint traces of longing and frustration. Annabelle lingered in the garden, curiosity and desire sharpened by defiance, and Elias, at the quiet center, carried the weight of both women's unspoken passions, their rivalry, and the delicate tension that held them in a precarious, intoxicating balance. The day passed, yet nothing resolved. The silent struggle for attention, desire, and unspoken connection grew stronger, more intricate, and undeniably dangerous. Bellwood was no longer merely a plantation. It had become a stage for forbidden longing, subtle challenges, and the magnetic pull of a man caught between two hearts. As night deepened, each candlelit shadow seemed to whisper one truth. The storm was only beginning. In the early morning, Bellwood sat silent, save for magnolia leaves brushing the veranda and distant cattle calls. Yet within, silence was deceptive. The air was thick with unspoken tension, making the faintest footstep echo like a drumbeat. Clara rose from her drawing-room chair, polished floors whispering under her dress. Her mind was a storm, tangled around Elias, entwined in the subtle provocations of her daughter. Annabelle's boldness, lingering near him, brushing arms under the guise of casual attention, pushed Clara to the brink of control. Authority alone could no longer restrain the jealous fire flickering beneath her composed exterior. "Elias," Clara said firmly as she entered the study, hand resting on the desk's edge. "I need your help with the accounts. There are discrepancies that must be resolved before the overseer arrives." He moved toward her with calm efficiency, the practiced grace of someone accustomed to navigating tasks and tension alike. "Of course, mistress," he replied, voice measured, steady, yet carrying the subtle weight of attention both women demanded without giving in. Annabelle, standing near the tall hallway window, watched silently, pretending .in terraced in the garden outside. Yet her gaze followed him like a predator. Every flick of his hand, every turn of his head, magnified in her mind. She could not resist testing boundaries even more. A slight step forward brought her hand near his elbow as he bent over the ledger, almost brushing the sleeve of his coat. Clara's eyes narrowed. She moved closer, resting a firm hand on the ledger as she leaned slightly toward him. "Make sure every entry is exact, Elias," she said softly, deliberately pressing against him under the guise of pointing to the numbers. Elias's dark eyes shifted between them. Calm yet aware of the quiet contest, he felt the magnetic pull of both women's intentions, the competing claims of authority and desire, pressing gently yet insistently upon him. Each gesture, each glance, each nearly touch was a test he handled with quiet precision. The morning hours were a delicate dance of subtle power. Annabelle found chances to intersect with him during chores, her fingers brushing his arm or shoulder, her gaze holding his just a fraction too long. Clara, meanwhile, asserted authority through measured touches, firm gestures, and calculated closeness, demonstrating dominance without showing the vulnerability creeping beneath her control. By midday, Clara decided to test Elias's loyalty directly. "You must attend to the overs. Here's a rival," she said, voice calm but carrying a subtle possessiveness. "And I expect every report to be exact and discreet." "Yes, mistress," Elias replied, bowing slightly. But the tension in his posture, the faint tilt of his head, betrayed his awareness of Annabelle's playful intrusions. He understood the delicate balance of loyalty and attention, the thin line between obedience and the invisible currents of desire tugging at him. Annabelle, sensing an opportunity, moved closer under the pretense of inspecting the ledger. Her hand brushed lightly against his wrist, a fleeting, teasing touch, almost imperceptible, yet full of intent. Clara's eyes caught the movement immediately, her chest tightening as she pressed her hand against the ledger, maintaining control while fighting the flare of jealousy that rose with every subtle gesture. The afternoon passed in the same charged atmosphere. Every glance, every movement, every subtle touch carried the weight of unspoken desire, rivalry, and tension. Clara and Annabelle both tested boundaries, each attempting to claim Elias without overstepping propriety. And in the center, Elias remained calmly aware, balancing duty and attention, conscious of the invisible tug-of-war framing each interaction. As evening approached, the first storm clouds darkened the plantation sky. The wind picked up, rustling the magnolia leaves outside, casting shadows through the tall windows. Inside, Clara called Elias to her private chambers, under the pretense of reviewing correspondence. The door closed behind them, cutting off the muted sounds of the evening and leaving only the charged tension between them. Clara's hands rested lightly on the ledger, but her gaze never left him. "Elias," she said softly, her voice showing just the faintest tremor of feeling, "you know the importance of loyalty here. You must not falter. Do you understand?" "I understand, mistress," he replied, calm, composed, his dark eyes steady on hers. Yet beneath the calm, a flicker of awareness stirred, a recognition of the hidden rivalries, secret desires, and magnetic attention that enveloped him. Outside the chambers, Annabelle lingered near the veranda, her eyes tracing his silhouette as he moved gracefully through tasks. The rain falling softly against the roof set a rhythmic accompaniment to the silent storm building inside the house. Every moment, every subtle gesture was a test of loyalty, control, and the invisible bond forming among them. The day ended without resolution, only heightening stakes. Clara's composure showed faint cracks, though she hid them behind measured authority. Annabelle's youthful defiance and curiosity pushed limits, daring Elias in ways she barely restrained. And Elias, standing between them, felt the weight of unspoken attention, desire, and expectation, remaining calm while navigating the invisible battlefield created by both women. As night fell, the plantation seemed to hold its breath, flickering candlelight reflected off polished floors and wooden panels, casting shadows that mirrored the quiet tension among mother, daughter, and the man who remained the still center of their world. Bellwood was no longer simply a plantation. It had become a stage for subtle power struggles, forbidden longing, and the dangerous dance of desire, loyalty, and rivalry none could predict. Somewhere in the quiet, the first faint spark of change stirred, a whisper of temptation, a flicker of rebellion, a shadow of what would soon be impossible to contain. The storm had arrived in full force by midday, rain lashing against the windows of Bellwood Plantation, wind shaking the tall magnolias outside. Inside, the air was equally turbulent, charged with colliding authority, desire, and rivalry. The quiet tension that had Sai murdered for days now threatened to boil over, leaving no room for pretense. Clara Marwood stood near the hearth, arms folded tightly, candlelight dancing across her face, highlighting the sharp lines of composure she had cultivated over years, managing both house and emotions. Yet her heart raced, betraying the restraint she tried to maintain. Every subtle touch, every lingering glance from her daughter toward Elias pressed heavily upon her. She had hoped to command desire and control, but it now seemed impossible. Elias moved quietly through the drawing room, carrying a tray of refreshments for the storm-bound afternoon, each step careful, deliberate, measured. He had grown used to navigating currents of attention and rivalry. Yet today the intensity was different, sharp, urgent, almost unbearable. His dark eyes flicked toward Annabelle, standing near the window, rain streaking across her youthful face, hair clinging slightly to her temples. She watched him, poised, playful, daring, every subtle movement crafted to ignite curiosity and desire. Clara's gaze followed them both, tension in her shoulders betraying the storm within. She called him to her side under the pretense of needing ledger assistance. Yet the unspoken claim of authority and possession ran beneath her words. "Elias," she said softly, the faint tremor in her voice hidden beneath calm tone. "I need you to stay attentive. Every detail must be exact. You understand the importance of loyalty here." "I understand, mistress," he replied, calm and precise. His eyes flicked briefly toward Annabelle, acknowledging her presence without betraying inclination. Maintaining the delicate balance he had mastered over days of subtle attention, Annabelle, unable to resist, stepped closer under the pretense of inspecting the ledger. Her hand brushed lightly against his wrist, deliberate, teasing, undeniable. Clara's fingers clenched subtly on the desk edge, jaw tightening as jealousy flared. The room became a stage for unspoken rivalry. Annabelle's playful defiance, Clara's simmering possessiveness, and Elias's calm authority created an almost unbearable atmosphere. Each subtle touch, lingering glance, small gesture carried the weight of desire and intention neither woman could fully restrain. The first crack in Clara's control came when Annabelle's hand lingered too long, tracing his forearm in a gesture innocent to the eye but incendiary in intent. Clara's breath hitched. Her carefully maintained composure threatened to break. The house itself seemed to hum with unspoken longing, the storm outside mirroring the tempest within. Elias, aware of growing danger, moved carefully between them. He remained composed, silent, yet every subtle gesture from either woman pressed upon him, pulling in ways nearly impossible to resist. He understood the delicate balance of loyalty, propriety, and desire, navigating the currents with quiet mastery, though he too felt the electric tension pressing from all sides. The rain intensified, pattering against the windows, an echo of the pulse of tension inside. Clara stepped closer to Elias, resting a hand lightly on his chest, under the guise of correcting the ledger. Annabelle, not to be outdone, leaned forward, fingers brushing his collarbone, eyes locking with his inner gaze charged with youthful defiance and curiosity. For a suspended moment, time seemed to hold its breath. The storm outside, the flickering candlelight, the silent breaths of all three. It was as if Bellwood itself waited for the inevitable clash of desire and authority. Clara's chest heaved slightly, first words of unrestrained emotion threatening to escape. Annabelle's playful defiance sharpened her youthful confidence, daring her mother to assert authority. Elias remained a calm center, aware of every intention, yet careful to honor his duties, holding the tension with near impossible grace. Then the storm shifted. Annabelle's hand lingered too long, tracing a line across his vest, and Clara's restraint faltered. She reached forward, gripping his shoulder firmly, the tremor in her fingers betraying her internal struggle. "Elias," she whispered, voice low, urgent, "you must understand your place." "My place." Elias's eyes met hers steadily, calm, unwavering. Yet the unspoken understanding in the room was undeniable. The invisible forces of desire, rivalry, and longing pressed in from every side. Each heartbeat, each brief touch, each glance carried deep meaning. Annabelle's defiance softened into a quiet gasp, her young hand retreating just a little, yet her eyes held steady. She had brushed against the forbidden and found it intoxicating. She knew clearly that her mother's authority, though strong, was not absolute when desire and curiosity were involved. For Elias, the weight of their focus, their yearning, and the careful balance he kept, reached its height. He stayed silent, respectful, yet every controlled movement, every slight shift in posture, acknowledged the magnetic pull of both women. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder rolling over the plantation, rain striking the roof in a relentless beat. Inside, the tension had reached its peak, a climax of unspoken rivalry, desire, and forbidden attention. Clara's composure, though still commanding, began to show small cracks. Annabelle's playful defiance had evolved into intentional provocation, and Elias, standing between them, remained the calm, silent center of a storm that could no longer be restrained. As night fully descended, the plantation seemed to tremble under the weight of long-suppressed emotions. The drawing room, the hallways, the gardens, all witnessed the subtle contests, the whispered touches, and the silent claims that had surged into a tension too intense to ignore. Bellwood Plantation had become a stage of forbidden longing, of power and irresistible desire, and the outcome of this delicate tension remained uncertain. Yet even in the heart of this storm, one truth stood clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The unspoken struggles, the magnetic tension, and the dangerous allure for forbidden attention had reached their peak. Bellwood would no longer be a house of quiet order. It had become a house of desire, rivalry, and unstoppable longing.